thank you all so very much for joining us this evening. It looks like we have a very nice turnout for this public information meeting. I'm First Selectman Jamie Stevenson, and I'm very pleased to be able to provide this information session tonight to the public regarding the Eversource transmission line vegetation management program that we have been working on with Eversource, Connecticut DOT, and many residents in the town of Darien over the last number of months. I want to thank Eversource for your time and your willingness this evening to be with us and provide this important information. I think it's a pretty good call that we made to do this virtually instead of in person here at Town Hall. If you've been watching the weather radar, we're about to get a pretty nasty storm, remnants of Hurricane Ida. So thank you. I know Eversource, you're on high alert with storms like this, as am I. So really appreciate your time this evening. Some administrative matters as we move into the public information section of the meeting. The ground rules will be that if you'd like to ask a question, if you could please post your name and your address into the chat. That's how we're going to know that you would like to ask a question, and you'll be called on in the order in which you sign up in the chat. Kate Bush and I will be managing the chat. Please limit your question to 2 minutes or less, so that we can allow all participants to ask questions if they would like to. Every person will have a turn to ask a question before we will allow you to ask a second question, just to be fair to the entire audience this evening. And we welcome all of your questions, but please do not use your 2 minutes to make a speech. This is an information meeting. Hopefully it's going to be a good sharing of information, and we'd like to limit it to questions only. And we will be ending the meeting promptly at 7:30. Some additional information for you this evening, supplemental to the information you're going to receive tonight from Eversource. The town of Darien has hired a third-party landscape architect, and we are about to pen a contract with a third-party arborist to work with the town of Darien, both on the vegetation removal proposals and the replanting plans that are going to be presented to us by Eversource. We would like these professionals to have ample time for a full review of the scope of the vegetation removal proposals and the replanting plans. In addition, we want to make sure that all of us are 100% firm on, with a common understanding on all the vegetation that's planned to be removed. Not just the trees that are posted, but any other vegetation, including shrubs, bushes, volunteer trees that might have grown, invasive species. So with our new third-party consultants coming on board, we want a level set so we all have a common understanding. So to that end, and because we need a little bit more time since we're just bringing them on board, we are going to reschedule the Little Brook public hearing to Tuesday, September 21st. So you'll see the notices being reposted, and we'll make sure that everybody in town in the Little Brook neighborhood will get the new meeting information. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Darien's Eversource Community Relations Specialist, Tracy Alston, who will do some introductions of her team members that will be presenting this evening. Thanks, Tracy.
You're welcome. Good evening, and thank you, Jamie, and the rest of the town officials for working with us and also allowing us to have the opportunity to conduct this information session. There are a number of Eversource participants on the call. The four key that I'd like to introduce, who will be presenting first and foremost, will be Sean Redding. He is the manager of our vegetation management for both distribution and transmission. Marsha Wellman, who is our senior project manager for project services outreach. Michelle Ford is our senior program administrator for environmental. And Chris Soderman is our director of engineering for transmission. So with that being said, so like I said, there are additional folks from Eversource on, more so for the fact if some questions arise that may actually be part of their area of expertise, that we'll be able to hopefully answer as many questions as possible this evening. For any questions that we're unable to provide an answer to, we will definitely be following up through the town, and they will be able to disseminate out our answers that way. So with that being said, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sean.
Just one other administrative note before Sean gets started. Thanks, Tracy. We're going to keep everybody's cameras off and mute you while the panel makes their presentation, and then we will allow you to turn your camera on and ask your question when we get to the Q&A. Thanks. All yours, Sean.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank the town for supplying this forum, for allowing Eversource to take this time to provide not only Darien, but the larger area of Connecticut with information regarding our transmission program, and specifically the project along the Metro North Railway and our transmission right away in the area of Darien. So I believe we have a presentation that we're going to be providing, that we supplied, that we are going to be presenting at this time. But I wanted to start with a safety message. As part of Eversource's focus on safety in everything we do, we always open our meetings with a safety moment. As the first selectwoman mentioned, the storm Ida is affecting our weather with potentially heavy rains and winds. This weather may lead to tree and branch failure, which could cause power outages or blocked roads. If you see a downed wire, keep your distance, especially if it's lying in standing water with the potential for flood that we have, because there's no way to tell if the line is energized or not. And if you see a down line, please call 911 to report it. Also, stay clear of any tree or branches that may be touching power lines. The power can travel through the trees and into anything the tree is touching, including the ground. So please keep clear. Please call Eversource to report an outage, and please keep yourself and others safe. So I wanted to begin our presentation regarding the information on the project that we have for our transmission project. The agenda that we're going to be covering in this presentation specifically deals with the Fairfield County Vegetation Project, the scope of work, the route that it is, Eversource clearance standards, the safety considerations that go into our program, reliability benefits from the work that we're doing for the transmission lines, and the partnering on mitigation that we are looking to complete. We're also going to talk about the transmission as the superhighway of the grid, the importance of it, how we are protecting the superhighway with the maintenance program that we have scheduled, and how that maintenance as well as the transmission lines are enabling the clean energy future that we are all seeking. So beginning with our Fairfield County Corridor Vegetation Management Project, we're going to talk about the route. The entire right-of-way, which goes from Greenwich to the Fairfield border, is 18 miles, and it runs through Darien, Greenwich, Stamford, Norwalk, and Westport. The work will be conducted primarily on property that is owned by the Connecticut DOT, Department of Transportation, that is adjacent to the Metro North and Amtrak Railway. There will be additional work outside of that is on private property owned by Eversource and property owned by the town. Those areas of not only the DOT, but private property and town property is typically within easements that are part of that parcel or property. There may be some additional work outside of that easement, but we are seeking consent of the property owner for any work that we may be seeking to do outside of the easement. And we'll be coordinating closely with the municipal partners and private property owners for any work that is scheduled, as well as any agreed upon mitigation after the work is complete. The scope of the work specific to Darien includes clearing the right-of-way that is adjacent to the railway. It's removal of incompatible trees that encompasses approximately 3.5 miles of transmission lines in Darien. Addition to the incompatible trees, which are tall growing trees that are in that easement, we also look to selectively control invasive species that interfere with our ability to access or maintain our lines, whether during regular maintenance or during restoration efforts. The work and the lines go on both the north and south side of the tracks until just west of Selleck Woods, where the lines on the south side cross, and actually eventually create two different corridors for the transmission right-of-way. One on the DOT property and one crossing private property. The scope of our work includes the typical maintenance that we perform, which is based on the species of vegetation, and we are looking for incompatible vegetation in trees that exceed a height of 15 feet when they are fully grown or at mature height, and vegetation that is less than that 15 feet of height at maturity may remain. Occasionally, we may need to remove it if it's directly next to or providing access to a structure. And then additionally, this work is going to be completed within the right-of-way, and also some of the work is going to be completed from the railway as needed. The Eversource clearance standards are specific to Eversource and developed through evaluation of vegetation that is common in Connecticut and New England. It takes into account the engineered design of the transmission lines, the engineering aspect of how the lines move and sag under different voltages and different weather, as well as the typical growth of trees and movement of trees during regular weather. And we looked to clear enough distance between the lines, not only in their present state, but also when they are at their full capacity or max sag, which is the lowest height that they can be. We require ample distance between the line and the vegetation so that the line can be safe, it can be reliable, and that our workers also have the ability to visually and physically access the line for maintenance and repair, and the safety of our workers, especially our tree workers, which are performing the tree work when the branches or trees are encroaching towards the line. Vegetation that could interfere with the operation or maintenance of the electrical system doesn't belong near these high voltage power lines. The safety considerations that we take into account are based on that these are high voltage transmission lines, which are different than the lines running down the street, the distribution lines which deliver power to our homes and businesses. Trees don't even have to make contact with the wires to cause an arcing, which is when electrons can jump from the line to the tree and that tree can become energized. Transmission lines need air clearance around the wires, which provide insulation and prevent these electric arcs from occurring. In addition to the reliability benefits, in addition to the safety benefits, there's also the reliability benefits. Removing these incompatible trees along our transmission lines enhances our ability to provide power to tens of thousands of homes and businesses in Fairfield County. The tree work reduces the risk of the interruption to service on these transmission lines, which service 120 critical facilities across multiple communities. And these critical facilities include hospitals, vaccination distribution sites, police, fire stations, and other facilities that are critical for not only the safety and well-being of these communities, but also the economic engine of Southwest Connecticut. There are multiple of these critical facilities, including Greenwich Hospital, Stanford Hospital, and the Ship and Landing Commercial Park, which all rely on consistent, reliable power being delivered through these transmission lines. Partnering on mitigation. While we can't allow the incompatible vegetation to grow near our power line, We are looking to work with underlying property owners and the town to incorporate their input into mitigation plans that may be implemented on their property. This project provides an opportunity to establish a habitat that's diverse, using native species that support a return of wildlife by planting shrubs and pollinator plants. For example, we've been collaborating closely with the Friends of Selleck Wood, and we'll continue to partner with them on developing a replanting plan for the park. They have chosen to consider that plan and finalize that plan after the work is complete so that they can see the extent of the work that needs to be done and have a good idea of what can be replanted to enhance that habitat. We'll be working with all of the underlying property owners and local communities who are impacted by this work to determine if mitigation is appropriate and to work with them to see what their interest is as far as any replanting that may occur on their property. All the planting that gets done is in agreement with the property owner as well as with with Eversource to make sure that it is compatible and doesn't cause a problem in the future. The next steps that we are looking at in this project timeline, we continue to perform outreach in the form of public meetings like this one, the hearing that is going to be rescheduled. We've performed multiple outreach directly to property owners who are impacted directly by the easements on their property or near their property. We've held several meetings out at Little Brook as well as other locations to discuss the work that is planned. And we will continue those meetings as requested to continue to have an open dialogue with all parties that may have questions, concerns, or input for this work that is happening. Following the tree hearing that is to be rescheduled, the tree warden will provide a decision on the town trees in question that have been posted. And following that decision from the tree warden for the work that's been approved, we will look to get that work scheduled unless it is appealed. And work that is not approved for removal from the tree warden for town trees that have been posted, we will be looking to evaluate those decisions and determine whether we need to appeal that decision of the tree wardens to PURA. That mediation will occur on a schedule set by PURA and will involve the impacted properties, primarily the DOT, the town, and Eversource. And then we will continue partnering on mitigation, continuing to work through getting approved planting plans for individual properties and the town that is agreed by both parties. Following the work that has been done, the most likely schedule for that replanting will be next spring because of the limitations and viability of planting late in fall when there's risk of frost. And a better option is to schedule that in the spring when the plants, whatever is agreed upon to be planted, have a better chance of surviving instead of planting right before frost or a potentially long winter. So we wanted to take a broader view and provide a little more information about how transmission provides the services of reliability and safety, not just to this localized area, but to the larger area. We all depend on transmission from the generation or power source. The transmission lines are the superhighway that bring the energy to our communities, to our region. That energy is stepped down through substations, and then you see the distribution lines that run along your street that deliver power to your homes, to our businesses, to keep everybody working and safe and cool or warm in the winter. You know, these are critical lines, and if those transmission lines are impacted, all downstream substations, distribution lines, customers, and businesses are impacted that. We routinely review our transmission lines and our system and perform vegetation clearing and upgrades as needed to ensure safe and a reliable electric service. And this project is part of that continued process to keep those transmission lines running, to keep them reliable. Part of our responsibility is protecting that superhighway. A reliable transmission system is foundational to connecting our customers with a growing number of clean energy resources that are available, like offshore wind. It's supporting the electrification of the transportation and heating sectors that we see growing interest and involvement in. And it ultimately will help us achieve our regional carbon emission reduction goals. This is key to supporting the goals that are set forth by the state and our regulators, and that are in the interest of our communities and our customers. These transmission lines enable this clean energy future. It's a key to enable it. A reliable transmission system connects us to the clean energy resources, to the grid, and meeting our customers' expectations to have access to that reliable and affordable clean power. The transmission maintenance and upgrades fortify the electric grid to make it more resilient day-to-day and in severe weather events, and ensure reliable power for our customers year-round. It is the key to our clean future. So that is the formal part of our presentation. And now we wanted to move over into questions.
Thank you so much, Sean. Really appreciate that. Right now, again, if you want to ask a question, please put your name and your address in the chat. We have one question so far from Hans Tallis. Hans, you should be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself and ask your question. Hans Tallis. If not Hans, then we will go to Natalie Tallis, assuming the same address. Can you unmute Natalie? Or Kate, can you unmute her? There you go.
Hi, thank you, Sean, and Jamie, thank you for organizing this with Tracy. I thought it was really helpful. As at least all of you know, I've been very concerned about the environmental impact of taking down all of these trees, and worried about the replanting plan, which doesn't, in my view, provide the same eco services that all those trees are currently providing. So I was wondering, we know in terms of trees coming down in the Darien right of way and on private property, but you keep saying most of the trees are now on CDOT property. I know that legally you probably don't have to release the number of trees, but since that will directly impact the town and neighborhoods around the transmission lines, I'm wondering if you could release at least a general number of trees so that the town and residents can prepare better for what it will look like when you take all those trees down.
Typically during our maintenance program, we don't keep account of the trees that are in the easement that are incompatible, that we are looking to remove or clear. The area along DOT stretches 3.5 miles. Not all of that is on DOT property. And we have, in certain sections, performed a survey identifying specifically where the edge of the DOT property, which is also the edge of our easement, is. So what we can say is that any incompatible tree within the easement are the ones that we are going to remove, but we do not have a count of them or an estimate.
Okay, I see that Hans Tallis is back on, so we'll go back to him for a question.
Sorry, Jamie, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, apologies. I got two devices here and had some hiccups. I have a few questions if we have time to come back around, but my first one
Recording
is,
stopped.
Hold on 1 second.
Recording in progress.
okay,
Okay, sorry about that. Go ahead, Hans.
okay. A question for Eversource. Have you applied for, or do you expect to apply for permission to expand the clear cutting program to distribution lines?
So the distribution program is based on what is approved by PURA. Eversource submits the vegetation management plan, and then it is reviewed and approved by PURA after a hearing, primarily through our rate case, but may also be in special session. There is a required tree hearing every 2 years that PURA must perform in order to prepare a report to the legislature. And currently, our standard maintenance practices that are included in distribution are the maintenance trimming, which it clears branches and trees encroaching into the distribution lines, the lines that run along your street, to a certain distance, depending on what voltage and which line it is. Along the line, say along Littlebrook, it would be 8 feet to the side, 10 feet below, and 15 feet above. On some of our main lines, we strive to get additional clearance, removing overhanging branches, which in weather or just through dieback of naturally of trees, those branches can fall on those primary lines. And then we also, the other major aspect of our distribution program is a hazard tree removal, where our licensed arborists go out, inspect the lines, identify trees that are hazards under the state definition, and then work with the property owners to seek consent to get those removals, and the town, if it's on overhanging the public way, to get consent to and permit to remove those hazard trees before they fall on our line. So that is the extent of our roadside distribution program. And there is at this time no intent to seek our distribution lines.
Thank you, Sean. We have a question from Pippa that she put in the chat. Pippa, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question directly. Feel free to do that. If not, I'll read your question. Okay, so Pippa asks, how many trees are going down 17 Littlebrook Road North and why? I'm not sure about trees coming down on Littlebrook Road North. So maybe a Eversource team member could check that for me.
If it's Littlebrook North, there's the scope of the work having to do with the transmission line doesn't include Littlebrook North. That would be a distribution line work, which I believe we completed earlier this year. So as to my knowledge, there is not, but we can follow up on that for 17 North Littlebrook.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Ali Costanzo. Ali, you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, I'm working on it. Hold on 1 second.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Sorry. Ignore the screaming kids in the background. So a lot of the residents are concerned about the environmental impact of this tree work. Has any sort of research, analysis, or study been performed for the damage that it would cause? And what is proposed to replace it as far as the replanting plan, is that sufficient enough to undo the significant damage of removing 1,000 trees over a half-mile stretch in Darien? We were originally talking about 52 trees. Now we're talking about clear cutting it. That's significant damage as far as noise pollution, heat pollution, loss of habitat, soil erosion and flooding, destruction of the homeland, of the animals that we've come to love, release of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases into the air, and the safety of our children to keep them off of the train tracks. So I know that's a lengthy question. I hope you got the bulk of it. Happy to repeat it if you need me to.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Michelle Ford. I'm our Senior Program Administrator, and I focus mainly on wildlife and environmental impacts such as that. And so I apologize, I can't answer to every one of the points that you brought up, though they are good. I will speak to, your use of the term damage in terms of, habitat. And so when the trees are removed, keep in mind that they're also going to be succeeded by other vegetation. And that vegetation is going to be compatible within the right-of-way. And what we're talking about is a lot of shrubs and ground cover that also provides habitat for a variety of species, whether it be, ground nesting birds, shrub nesting birds, and just kind of shifts that ecosystem into something that's more stable and more compatible with the right-of-way. When you have these non-compatible tree species growing near the power lines, as it's been evident, in Darien, where we've had several outages, we've also had incidents of fire, and that's not safe for, let alone the people, but also the animals and the habitat. So what will succeed once those trees are removed, although it will change aesthetically, is going to be new habitat for pollinators, for avian species, for mammals. So a whole variety of species will come in there.
Thank you, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to try and reserve our Q&A for Darien residents. Right now, we don't have any other questions. So I think we want a clarification.
We had a follow-up from Ms. Costanza.
Yes, I see that now. Okay. We'll go to the follow-up, and then I think that Hans Tallis had an additional question, and then we will go to our guest from Stanford. So, Allie, go ahead.
Hi. So the first two parts of that was actually the noise pollution and the heat pollution. So I appreciate you mentioning about the habitats, but what about the significant amount of noise that is going to be left behind for us? And what about the significant heat pollution? There's a major difference at the top of the hill outside of 9 Littlebrook Road as compared to in front of our house. So what is the solution for noise pollution, and what is the solution for heat pollution?
So I apologize, Allie. Unfortunately, I'm not credentialed enough to answer the question on noise and heat pollution. I know that trees do absorb a significant amount of heat, but again, when we are changing over to that sustainable shrubland community, there is a significant amount of absorption and solar absorption that's going to happen. And so you may not get the shading that you would from a large tree, and I recognize that. I guess it just depends on the scope and scale of what you're thinking. But again, it comes down to the safety and reliability of our system and what we have to balance with that. Because if we are in a system where we allow these large non-compatible tree species to threaten the system and cause outages and fires, that's far more significant than any gains that we would make from the heat pollution, if you will. But again, I'm not entirely qualified to answer that in detail, but that's something that we can take down and get back to you on if you'd like.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, we're going to go back to Hans Tallis.
Hey, Jamie, can you hear me this time as well?
Yes.
Thank you. So my second question is, if this is a multi-year or maybe multi-season program to get it all implemented for the Fairfield County corridor, is it possible to interleave the implementation? So instead of taking, say, all 60 trees on Littlebrook Road at one time, replanting with low growth, can we take every 4th tree, replant, come back next year, again, take every 4th tree and so forth to interleave the implementation that way, if it's going to be a multi-year program anyway?
So we are not planning to do that. This is part of our maintenance program, and we typically come around to each right-of-way every 4 years and inspect them off cycle to make sure there's no encroaching growth. This is a narrow right-of-way, and the position of the lines, we are already going to have to be revisiting for branches that are encroaching from outside the right-of-way and growing in, which is already a above and beyond maintenance requirement than a typical right-of-way, which is much wider. So we are looking to remove all the incompatibles and then come up with a mitigation plan with the property owners and with the town. We've seen this as a successful method in all of our other right-of-ways across Connecticut and across our Eversource territory. And it starts the process of converting these right-of-ways over to what we call an early successional low-growing habitat. The early successional part is naturally the environment in Connecticut shifts towards full-grown, mature, large trees. And so we, through our integrated vegetation management program, arrest that development in that early successional to keep that low-growing grassy shrubs there, which create a stable habitat and plant community, which then can thrive and support the other ecological and benefits to the ecological habitat benefits that are important for many different types of flora and fauna.
Thank you.
Okay, we had a direct question request from Terry Wood. Go ahead, Terry.
Thank you very much, Jamie. My name is Terry Wood. I'm state representative for Norwalk and Darien, and I met with the neighbors about 2 weeks ago. And I have a question. First of all, thank you to Sean and Michelle for meeting with all of us tonight. My question is, there's concern, which I understand totally, at the very end of Littlebrook Road where it meets the entrance to Selleck's Woods, that the cutting of the shrubbery and the vegetation that's there now would lead to a real safety issue for kids potentially running across the tracks. And I just wonder what the plan is for protecting that safety issue.
So thank you, Terry. I think we do have at least one representative from Connecticut DOT on the call tonight, but I'll take a first crack at that and then open it up to anybody from DOT that wants to address. We have identified our concerns over safety when we've done multiple site visits, and one of our last site visits with DOT personnel, it was relayed to us that with some regularity, we have individuals that walk along the tracks, not necessarily from Littlebrook Road, but from other places too. So we raised that concern, and DOT has promised to take a separate look at the safety concerns that have been identified. But if there's someone on the call, I think I saw Eric Bergeron on this call. If you wanted to unmute yourself and talk about that, please feel free.
Hi, I'm just trying to get my setup here. Hi, this is Eric Bergeron from DES. That's Jamie. We'll look at those locations isolated. We've also related to the department has a safety outreach program for the communities and also the school systems where we actually go out and provide safety materials to kids that are out there, neighborhoods on transportation safety in and around the railroad tracks. This gets into trespassing prevention, et cetera. We'll also look at fencing if it's warranted. Obviously, we can't fence the whole corridor, but if there's isolated locations where there's a frequency of pedestrian movements, that's concerning to us as well. So we will we've agreed to take a look at that closer as we go along.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
if I could add one thing about safety, because the topic of safety was brought up, we had to do 2 emergency trimming efforts earlier this summer because the trees were encroaching towards the line enough so that the lines were arcing over, which creates a safety situation for any of those trees. If those lines arc over those trees, they can become energized as well as the ground around it. So that is an unsafe condition that we are clearing.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, I think we had a question from Marie Morgan.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so my question is related to I believe there was, someone had said, so I understand that there was the arcing, but were there actual outages that have occurred on Littlebrook Road from these trees that are being taken down?
No, and we do not wait for trees to cause outages on transmission. We want to be proactive and remove them far before they cause an outage or a disturbance to our line or can arc over.
Okay.
So it's an important question to note the difference here between transmission and distribution. This is Chris. That unlike distribution, right, where you see a tree falling on a distribution line will cause an outage to the street that it's on, an outage to transmission can actually black out an area, a town, parts of a town, or several towns. So it's important to remember that there's a distinction. And further down in this corridor in 2014, we actually did have an outage that actually blacked out a good portion of Greenwich that was caused by a tree that came across both transmission lines.
And in addition to impacting customers and businesses, the Metro North and Amtrak rely heavily on this transmission line, providing power to their stations so that they can run their trains. And when that is impacted by a disturbance, that has huge ramifications for people who live in that area, who travel down to New York or down to Stamford or other areas. And that, that is a key component of the economic engine that drives Southwest Connecticut. That Metro line and Amtrak have to be reliable, and we have to have reliable power to keep them running.
So, yes, and I think all of us fully appreciate and value that safety as well, and that ability to have power. I think I just was wondering if there was any studies that show a link that says like this number of trees is a direct impact, and then also a study that would show what would be the impact if you continued with your current plan. And so I was hoping you could talk a little bit too about why you've changed from the cutting of the trees to this clear cutting.
Sure. Eversource reevaluated our standards and specifications and reviewed it as compared to what other utilities do across the nation, looked at industry best management practices, and reevaluated the vegetation that's growing out there with the forward thinking of what the possibilities of climate change would be, both in the impacts from drought or heavier rain, or possibly increased growth from a longer growing season. So in 2018, we updated our specifications. And one aspect of that we changed was that we were no longer going to top trees, incompatible trees, and incompatibly trees that grow tall. We were no longer going to top them if they were within our easement and either directly under or adjacent to our transmission lines. For the long-term sustainability of and reliability of our transmission line, to remove this and get it converted over into that early successional habitat. And those tall growing trees that we previously topped, they respond by growing back and putting out what we call either sucker growth or advantageous growth, replacing the vegetation that we trim. And that vegetation is often grows faster than the normal vegetation on a tree and is also more weakly attached. So it may fail more readily during storms or even during regular weather. So all of those factors, as well as the safety component of maintaining clear transmission lines, directed us towards changing the specification and no longer leaving those incompatible trees in our right of way.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, we're going to move to Alba Dexheimer.
Hi, hello everyone, pardon the screeching toddler in the background. So the nature of my question is about this policy change that Eversource is implementing unilaterally. Given the fact that the transmission lines in question are 115 kilovolts, the federal regulations for clearance don't apply. So Eversource does have discretion in addressing the required clearance, and the standard, as you mentioned, Sean, has changed. I just like my question relates to the fact that I understand that there's an industry standard, and that's fine. The vast majority of these transmission lines run along the Metro North train line and don't necessarily affect residential neighborhoods. So my question is around, why is there no environmental impact study when it does affect residential neighborhoods such as ours, which is about, I think it's a quarter mile, either a quarter mile or a half mile, bordering a nature preserve, when Eversource actually does have the discretion to analyze this particular stretch of transmission line. And then also the second thing is that I understand that you're saying it's a safety concern, et cetera. We all agree that we want reliable transmission lines. To me, it seems like that Eversource is saving quite a lot of money by eliminating the maintenance. So the 4-year plan of trimming will be completely eliminated, given that Eversource is clear cutting all of the vegetation above 15 feet that it can legally touch. So my second question is, how much money is Eversource saving by eliminating the maintenance program?
Right. So I apologize. There was a lot in that question, or a couple questions. So I'm going to do my best to address the question that you had about the environmental impact statement. And so what I think is very important is to understand that we do an environmental impact review, which is many times above and beyond what is required by the pertinent regulations for state and federal organizations, by the Army Corps of Engineers, by DEEP. And so what we do when we have these projects is we look at those kind of sensitive areas, sensitive receptors, whether it be state listed species, critical habitat, wetland resources, vernal pools, water courses, floodplain, all of those sensitive resources, and we evaluate what resources are or are potentially within our project corridor. And so we go through and we look at what the potential resources are and then what our potential impact is to those resources. We apply for the necessary permits as required, and we apply BMPs and protection measures either as required or as directed by our own internal processes. So there is some level of environmental impact review. It's not perhaps the one that you may be referring to, which is a little bit different and is a more formal process that's gone through by state agencies. But again, I do think it's important that you know that we do implement many, many BMPs and protection measures to protect those sensitive resources. Maybe Sean can answer a little bit about the voltage portion of that as well, but if you have something to come back to, I'm happy to address that as well.
So I think I believe the second question was regarding the cost of the work. We are, as a transmission operator, regulated at a different level than at the state. It's regulated under ISO New England, which is the regional entity that manages pricing and tariffs. But their main focus for all transmission operators is a safe and reliable system. And the work that we have planned to remove the incompatibles from the right-of-way is not a one and done type of situation. There will be regrowth, there will be new trees that come up because of seed sources and new trees that enter the area, pioneer species, that we then have to maintain going forward, meaning looking to remove incompatibles in the future maintenance cycles. So this is not an effort that ever ends. I think of it as job security, but it is the natural state that trees grow back in because of the area that we work in, and especially in an unmaintained right-of-way that's like this one, that's primarily along the railway. It is not an area that is, for example, a lawn area that is mowed. So trees will be reintroduced either through regrowth or through seeds. And so it is a continual maintenance position that Eversource is in to maintain the reliability and safety of those lines.
Thank you very much. We will move to Kip Morgan.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. So, Sean, I did not hear you actually give an answer. I heard a lot of words, and you know, it's not going to be free, and there's job security. But the question was, how much did you guys spend on this tree trimming, and how much do you forecast having to spend on it moving forward afterwards? And if we could get an answer to that. And I also, following up on a question that Hans asked, which said, hey, could you do this instead of all at once? Could you do this? Could you phase it in over a couple of years? And I heard that's not the plan, and we all understand that's not the plan. But the question is can you, and would you consider that as a compromise? Because we're just looking for a compromise here. We're not looking to fully stop everything you're doing. We just want to, you know, the best outcome possible. So follow up to get the answer that was just asked regarding the costs involved, and then a follow up to Hans's question regarding can you. We understand it's not your plan, but can you, and is that something that you would consider, and what would be the process to get you to consider if it's not currently in your roadmap?
Sure. Thank you for the follow-up. So we're not going to, you know, disclose our maintenance costs. You know, there's contractors involved in contract pricing, so we're not going to be disclosing the cost of the work. We have the authority to spend what is appropriate to reach our specification based on the standards that we have set, to have a proactive maintenance program where we are protecting our transmission lines from a safety and reliability standpoint. So I'm not going to answer the cost question. As far as for the compromise, as this is maintenance, and we have easements on many of these locations, those easements allow us to perform this maintenance. And so the compromise that the company is offering, because we realize this is a change from past practices, and that it is an impact to not only the individual property owners, but also to neighborhoods and to the town, we are offering the mitigation planting. And that is really the form of the compromise that we are offering. And so we are looking to partner with communities and towns to come to agreement on these plans so that we can more quickly convert these to that early successional low-growing habitat that is compatible with the right-of-way. We've done this in other towns and with many property owners across not just this corridor, but across the whole state and our entire Eversource region. For example, we have a framework in place with the town of Greenwich, where we will reach an agreement to remove compatibles and provide a planting plan. That process is still underway, but we have that framework and the understanding between the parties that this is the best for both of us.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Natalie Tallis.
Hi, thank you. I don't even know where to go with this. So we are in a very different time than we were 10, 20 years ago. And I find Eversource has been terrific. Jamie has got them out here to meet with us multiple times, but you've actually never changed anything that you've said. Climate change wasn't a term that any of us thought about 30 years ago. Now we do. Yet you're still going ahead with not being transparent about the trees you're taking down in the CDOT property, which could be thousands, it could be hundreds of thousands. We have no idea. You have not addressed invasives with your replanting plan. The 2021 report to Pura mentioned herbicides and addressing some woody plants, but on everything that you've marked on Little Brook Road, you've left Tree of Heaven completely unmarked, and that will reach 80 feet at maturity. And you've also completely ignored this entire, I mean, it's new specifications, but if you actually had an effective vegetation management plan, we wouldn't be here today. I apologize. So a low growing, you keep talking about incompatible trees, which I completely understand, but you're leaving a lot of those incompatible trees. You've also, and I guess my question is this, a low growing shrub habitat is not compatible with the neighborhood. We asked you back in June if there were any exceptions for neighborhoods like ours, since most transmission lines, you know, may be in the middle of nowhere and you could do these gorgeous meadows. But can we be an exception? And what are you going to do about addressing invasives? If the invasives aren't addressed, it doesn't matter what you plant, they won't thrive. So I guess it's overall, one, looking at the environment more broadly, and the replanting plan. How can you make that more meaningful for us? More plants addressing invasives. And
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, I'm babbling.
No, that's okay. I just there's several parts to that question. So starting out with the smaller trees along the roadway, that is part of what is being reevaluated in preparation for the hearing, to make sure that and the town can speak to the posting process or what the plans may be, but our request for the trees in the town right of way, we're always to include all the incompatibles, regardless of how tall or small they may be. That has not wavered or changed. Specific to the planting plan, the commitment was with the town because it is town right of way, and with the agreeable nature of the DOT, some of the planting is going to occur on DOT property, even though it's an unmaintained area. And with the understanding and commitment from the town that they would care for them after installation, we would manage the installation of whatever is finally agreed upon in the planting plan. And then the town would care for it, whether it be on town property or the DOT property. But that planting plan, we've submitted the first draft. And as the select woman mentioned at the start, that they are hiring some consultants and some professionals to assist with them, to review it, provide feedback. And we will continue to work with them to satisfy what they feel is an adequate planting plan. But invasives specifically, many of the types of invasives that are out there are tough, really tough to manage. Specifically Japanese knotweed, that is prevalent and has colonized some of the area. That is difficult, and we have checked with experts at the Connecticut Agriculture Extension, with UConn, with DEP Forestry. There's not a really good solution to long-term control and management of Japanese knotweed besides continual, consistent cutting, and in some cases the use of herbicides to control it. It is a very aggressive, hard to control invasive plant that propagates through vegetatively, meaning if a leaf falls on the ground, it can start sprouting roots and grow a new plant. It's a heavy seeder, meaning puts out a lot of seeds, and it can even grow vegetatively underground through rhizomes. It's a really tough plant to control. There's not always negatives to all the invasives that are out there. If you've noticed, the Japanese knotweed is in bloom at this time, and it is a really healthy pollen source for pollinators. I mean, not that we are looking for it to expand, but it does provide some ecological benefit to pollinators and other things that everybody is interested in promoting. So there isn't a good solution, unfortunately, for controlling those invasives like knotweed.
Thank you, Sean. We're going to go to Ali Costanzo and then to Kylie Morgan.
So Michelle had mentioned earlier that there's already been an environmental impact review done by Eversource. Can they share that report with us so we can verify? I think if they don't want to disclose it to the public, they should, if nothing else, disclose it to the town of Darien to show that they've not only done their research, but taken measures to make sure that there are protective measures in place to replace the dramatic impact that's going to happen by clear cutting half a mile on Little Brook Road.
Yeah. So Allie, thank you for following up on that, environmental impact report. So I think that maybe I didn't explain it very well in the first place. So what you're thinking of is an environmental impact report, which is a standalone document which incorporates a number of different factors, like you had mentioned, like the heat pollution, noise pollution, but also wildlife habitat, wetland resources, floodplain. We don't do a standard report for all of our projects, whether it's vegetation management, transmission, distribution, a number of our projects. What we do is we work internally and review the different aspects which go into that report to understand the constraints. So what we do is we develop project specific mapping, say that includes, those sensitive resource areas to look at. Are there state listed species in that area? Is there a floodplain? Are there regulated wetlands? We go out and delineate the wetlands. Is there, what are the other environmental constraints? And again, those sensitive receptors, but please don't think that we develop a standard like report for each project. So we don't have something like that we could provide to you. Does that help to answer your question a little bit?
So if there hasn't been a formalized report done, we are a little bit back at square one. So
no, so not necessarily. So what we do is we go through and we review and we say, where are the wetlands? And we'll put that on our project mapping. And then we say, do we need any wetlands permitting from Army Corps of Engineers? And, that's who regulates some of our wetlands. And so we look and we orient our work to see where we need permits, right? For this project, I know there are no state listed species, for instance. There's no NDDB, Natural Diversity Database polygons, which are regulated by DEEP. So we look at what those permitting thresholds are and those permitting triggers. But again, it's not in one standalone document. We look at, what work is going to take place in floodplain, and do we need to make any accommodations in order so that we're compliant with floodplain regulations, right? So we look more at it in terms of the regulations and our compliance.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to Kylie Morgan.
Hi, thank you, Jamie, for having this meeting. My question is about meeting the carbon neutrality goals in the transportation of green energy from Sean's PowerPoint. I just wanted to know if there will be a count of the trees and small shrubs taken down to take into account for the meeting of this carbon neutrality goal. I think it's really great that we're incorporating green energy, but it's currently coming at the expenditure of the carbon sequestering power of these trees. So will the loss of these trees be taken into consideration?
Kylie, that was an excellent question. And I'm really glad that you asked it, because our carbon neutral by 2030 goal is really big at Eversource. And it's something that we do take seriously. And so one thing that may be kind of misconstrued, however, is that we do not factor in vegetation management, vegetation removal in terms of calculating our carbon footprint. And we focus more on our facilities and our operations, right? So our different facilities and what their emissions may be, fugitive gases, and looking at our infrastructure to calculate our carbon footprint. We will be looking at potentially some vegetative offsets for our carbon footprint, but we do not take into account the amount of vegetation that is removed. But also know that just because we are removing these trees, they will be succeeded by other, vegetation. It will just be that kind of lower growing shrub, early successional community. So it's not, don't think that it's going to be clear cut and pavement. There will be substantial vegetation there, and there will be, a variety of ground cover, shrub cover, that will succeed those trees naturally.
Thank you, Michelle. And yes, Kylie, that was a great question. Okay, I think we're going to go back to Natalie Tallis for another question.
Hi, I just wanted to mention, we've been doing an inventory of the trees along Little Brook Road. And one thing that's been apparent is that a lot of trees that, Sean, you would call incompatible have not been tagged. So, and this isn't just the invasives, these are other birches and oaks. And so I'm wondering what your criteria, because there are so many trees that you're taking down, why you also left so many of these so-called incompatible trees. And again, you know me, I don't want you taking on any of these, so, but I am curious because I was surprised as I've walked the street a couple of times that there are many trees not tagged.
So as I mentioned, in our initial walk down with the tree warden, we requested that all the incompatibles be removed. And then the tree warden decided which trees to tag at that time. And why some weren't and weren't, I can't answer that. That would be a question for the town to answer. But our request was that all the incompatibles, whether they be a native or an invasive tree, because of their mature height and their location, and the location of the lines near the edge of that easement, that we requested all of them to be removed to the town.
Okay, I think we have a follow-up from Kylie Morgan.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up with you, Michelle. So I just wanted to clarify, the carbon sequestering power of these trees is completely inequitable to the carbon sequestering power of any shrubs or grasses that you're going to put in. And I just wanted to confirm that you're not recording the change in carbon sequestering power, and you're not incorporating the removal of trees into your carbon footprint as a corporation.
That is correct. But one thing that's important to note, and that I failed to mention when I spoke a minute ago, is that you also have to think of the system as a whole in terms of reliability, right? So if we fail to remove these trees and they continue to grow and cause an outage, or if we have to continue to revisit this section of right-of-way, say, twice a year, once a year, to ensure that they're not encroaching on the wire zone, there's a significant carbon footprint from that heavy equipment that's entering the right-of-way repeatedly. Okay, so not only in the maintenance does that increase the carbon footprint by leaving these non-compatibles, but also if there's an outage, right, and a significant disruption to the system and the carbon footprint that results. So our goal, although we don't take into account the trees in terms of carbon footprint, is really kind of on a more global scale in terms of a stable energy grid and a sustainable grid, so that we don't have to maximize and spend all that time and effort re-entering the right-of-way for maintenance and for outages, right? So if we have that early successional stable community, it kind of takes care of itself, and it's a much more hands-off approach. And that means less vehicles, less equipment, and less carbon coming back to those areas.
Okay, I want to make sure that I'm managing this chat properly. Did I miss a follow-up from Marie Morgan?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Yep.
Another question for you, Michelle. You had mentioned there would be some differences with wetlands, and I just want to, there are wetlands in this area that has the trees coming down. So does that mean that will impact which trees have been marked as coming down in that area?
So that's a great question. So regardless of wetland resources, we do need to maintain that compatibility, right? So those non-compatible species must be removed. But it's important to note that when we have instances like that with those sensitive resources, such as wetlands, we will alter our approach. And so in wetlands, what we're going to do is we're going to go out and field delineate the exact boundary, because as you likely know, over time, wetland boundaries can change. And so we're going to field delineate those, flag those areas, and ensure that all of the non-compatible species are going to be hand cut in those areas and removed carefully and delicately so as to minimize the impact. Now that will change some of the dynamics in the wetland, but again, those are areas where we also focus on leaving a lot of the compatible shrubby species to protect those resources, but they do receive an extra level of care and best management practices.
Okay, Hans Tallis.
Thank you, Jamie. And related to Kylie's questions, I guess the part of the presentation from Eversource discussing green power, I didn't quite understand the linkage with the Fairfield County clear cutting program. I assume these transmission wires are carrying electricity that's both, call it green and brown, regardless of its source. So I guess to put a a finger on it. The question is, if we don't proceed with the Fairfield Corridor clear cutting program, how many megawatts of clean power will not be added to the Eversource grid?
So this is Chris Otterman here. So it's kind of holistic in nature, but having the access along of our transmission, having the reliability of our transmission is paramount to accessing any sort of generation. So it's difficult to quantify transfer limits, and it, you know, as any planning engineer will tell you, it depends on a number of factors, not just the rating on a particular transmission line. However, more immediately relevant, we will actually save on brown power generated, because if we lose these transmission lines, we'll be interrupting load. And when that happens, we won't be, you know, there'll be that much reduction in the power usage in the system.
Okay, we're going to go to Ali Costanzo. And just to give you a little weather notice while we're on this call, we have a tornado watch until 1 a.m.
Thank you for the heads up, Jamie.
Yep.
So I guess rest a lot of the other issues that I have, because I know that you said that you would follow up with me. So I just want to make sure that somebody saw in my comments that I really would like somebody to follow up. My remaining question has to do with the noise pollution. You have a lot of tax-paying residents along the half-mile stretch in question. So the original plan of removing 50 trees would have obviously caused a significant increase in noise from the trains barreling by our house. If you plan on clear cutting it, that makes an even bigger concern for us. Our property values will plummet. Our quality of living will plummet. What is the solution for the noise pollution? And before somebody tries to answer this with low-lying bushes, we all know that that isn't going to do anything. If you can see the tracks, you can hear the tracks. So can we increase the replanting plan to have more mature trees and more of them? And most importantly, something lining the train tracks, like a rhododendron. There were some of the plants that I saw in the original one that are like big evergreen bushes. We're not denying that some of the trees have to come down, but the replanting plan has to be significantly beefed up. If you're planning on taking down 1,000 trees, you have to plan on planting more than 90. Can somebody answer about the noise pollution and any changes that have happened to the replanting plan since the original draft, and what the future plan is for addressing our concern about the noise pollution?
Sure. Noise is not an area of my expertise. While a thick, heavy stand of trees can deflect some of the sound, the number and placement of the trees as they are currently, having been out there, trying to have conversations with people, and every time a train go by, having to pause that conversation because of the sound of the train, the condition is already exists. Eversource also did offer to all of the property owners across the street from the DOT property to plant on that side of the street, of course compatible with the distribution line in front of their house, but anywhere on their property, to help provide either a visual screening to them. Whether that would assist with the noise, I can't say, but we did offer that to the property owners across from the DOT property, where these town trees along the roadway we are seeking to get removed. So that offer is there. Particular to the planting plan, we submitted the draft to the town, and as was stated, they are seeking consultants and reviewing it, and we'll continue that conversation. And from Eversource's standpoint, as long as the ultimate solution are compatible trees, and that the town continues their commitment to provide maintenance of those trees, and if it's on DOT property, DOT approves, then we are open to any and all suggestions from the town on what can go there and what will go there. You know, we have to take into account the locations, the site condition specific to that. It's not, you know, fantastic soil. It's there's several structures and infrastructure along there, culverts and bridges and things. There's also, as was mentioned earlier, invasive plant communities, which, as I talked to before, are very difficult to control. But planting close to the railway would require agreement from the DOT, as well as a plan to maintain that, which has a limit because of the proximity to the railway. Much like when we are out there performing work, requires safety measures, including train flaggers, to keep everybody safe, as well as the train flowing. So there is a lot of aspects to that which make it difficult of planting near the railway. But the offer is still open to anybody across the street from the DOT if they now want to accept it, or after the work is done, after they see whatever is approved by the town and the work that we complete there, they're still interested in planting. We will fulfill that commitment, and we will continue to work with the town to come to an agreeable plan on the planting plan for the town right away and adjacent DOT property.
Thanks, Sean. We're going to go to, I think, back to Kylie Morgan.
Hey, Jamie, I'm sorry, before we move forward, I just would like the project team to address, because there seems to be some confusion that the project had always started out as solely 50 trees. And I'd really like to clarify that, because there seems to be a misconception, because it's been mentioned several times. So if we could please just take a moment to let the project team actually address that, and then can we go to the next one? So apologize for interrupting, but that's kind of important on this one. Sean.
Sorry about that. So we provided a list of all the trees that were on town right-of-way that the town posted. So I believe that count was 65 trees that were posted along there, but that was back in May, as well as some additional posting that happened after that, not along the DOT property, but the other end of Littlebrook, including Raymond. So the list that we provided was based on the trees that were posted by the tree warden, and that list was provided based on a request from the town. So there may be more trees that we had requested, the ones that Ms. Tallis mentioned, the invasive small size or diameter trees, or the other incompatible small size trees. But we provided the list to the town of the ones that were posted.
Thank you, Sean.
Okay, now we can go to Kylie Morgan.
Hi, yeah. I just had a second follow-up. So just since Eversource is not taking into account the removal of trees into your carbon neutrality goals, are you keeping account of the trees being removed? And are you checking in on these changed ecosystems? And then the second part of my question is, how are you ensuring that the use of herbicides does not affect the new ecosystems? Not only are we adjacent to Selleck Woods, a land reserve, we also have wetlands on the land in question.
All right, again, with the excellent questions, so I really appreciate them. So in terms of the tree count, you know, I've heard this a lot, come up a lot tonight, and we don't count trees because every tree is not equal, right? Whether you have a, say, 6-inch diameter maple tree versus an 18-inch oak tree, those trees are not the same in terms of the habitat value and function to the ecosystem that they provide, right? So to count all trees equal, we could say we're going to take down 50 trees, but if all 50 trees are just these 6-inch kind of sickly saplings that are overrun by invasive vegetation like bittersweet, that's not going to be the same as if it were 50 mature oak trees, right, that are providing a different habitat level. So I just want to kind of clear that up, that that's also part of why we don't count trees. Also, the definition of what a tree is varies significantly. Is it everything that is over 3 inches in diameter? Is it everything that's over 6 inches in diameter? And what a forester may call a tree is not the same as what a wetland regulator may call a tree. So I just want to kind of dispel some of that on terms of counting trees. And so no, we do not keep track of the count of the trees. One thing that we do pay attention to, particularly in environmental, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but is really the functions and values of an ecosystem. And that's an Army Corps of Engineers standard where you look at an environment and you look at what functions it's providing, whether it be nutrient retention, sediment intoxication, retention, habitat value, aesthetics. There's, I think, 10 or 11, maybe 12 different functions and values that these ecosystems provide. And so we tend to evaluate our work and our impact in terms of the impact to those functions and values. Okay, now that's just kind of a holistic approach. When we get into those sensitive resource areas, like you mentioned, wetlands, we will look at those in terms of not only the functions and values, but how our work is going to change that environment, if it will change it, and how we could minimize those changes. Okay, so that's kind of the tree count, more in terms of the functions and values of how we approach these systems. But also please note that all of this is done in compliance with pertinent regulations, environmental regulations from the state, from the federal government, what have you, from PURA, FERC, NERC. We are very regulated, and our environmental resources are no exception to that. So on to your question about herbicides. So if you don't mind, your concern is that we would use herbicides near the wetland. And so that you're aware, you know, I used to be an herbicide applicator myself, and until I learned a little bit more about it, I was really quite opposed, and it was quite scary. But so you know that a lot of the herbicides have label restrictions, so they're not allowed to be used within or proximal to wetland resources because of the potential impact to fish and aquatic resources. So there will be no herbicide use that is not done in accordance with the label specifications. There are specific aquatic herbicides that are used, but those are typically for more kind of submarine or, you know, benthic underwater plants, if you will. And so what we do for wetlands is we really try to focus more on our manual cutting for those non-compliant species, which are those kind of tall growing woody stems. So I hope that it answered your question, but if not, you know, feel free to put something up in the chat or ask it again.
And if I could add to that on the tree count part, the reason that we have the count for the town trees that are under the jurisdiction of the tree warden is because that was asked of us by the town to provide, which we were glad to do if it helps the process of posting input from the public and then ultimately the hearing that they decided to hold. So that's the reason why those are counted, because we were asked as part of the permitting process. Whereas trees not in the public right of way, as Michelle and I have mentioned before, we don't do a stem count of.
Thank you very much, Sean. We're going to go to Shirley McCarthy.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I would just like to ask, is Eversource aware of all the human health benefits of trees? I know we've talked about pollution reduction and, you know, CO2 reduction, like a white oak reduces CO2 annually by 2,200 pounds, but there are also health effects. For example, there are studies in cardiovascular medicine that show that residential greenness directly correlates with cardiovascular risk factors, angiogenic stress, serum epinephrine, hence the incidence of heart attacks. And that's just having trees in your neighborhood. Similarly, mental stress and cognitive decline is statistically significantly less in tree-lined neighborhoods. School children that look out at trees do better, perform better, and have less problems in school compared to looking out at a lawn. Wildlife benefits. The World Wildlife Fund has reported that we've lost 70% of our wildlife in the last 50 years, all human caused. Getting rid of trees hurts our wildlife. A mature white oak supports over 900 species.
Excuse me, Shirley, do you have a question? Because we're running out of time and we want to make
Okay,
sure we
look,
leave
all right, I
time for
just wanted to
questions.
say, is Eversource aware of this? And is this factored into just cutting down trees?
Yeah, I mean, we all have our degrees in forestry, arboriculture, environmental forest biology. We all have certifications and licenses that require continuing education units, and these items often come up. We have a partnership with UConn where we invest in research and outreach into the communities regarding that research, not only to communities, but also to our regulators and our legislature. But ultimately, we subscribe to a right tree, right place thought process. Trees are great, but only if they're in the right spot, and the right tree has to be in the right place. An incompatible tree that can be a safety impact or reliability to tens of thousands of customers and critical infrastructure isn't a long-term benefit. I would again offer that we are providing a mitigation plan because trees aren't the only vegetation that provides benefits. And again, we are offering mitigation on the opposite street. So we fully adhere to a right tree, right place. And an incompatible tree, whether it be to a power line, to a sewer line, to a house foundation, or a risk to the public is not a good choice.
Thank you, Sean. We have a follow-up from Ali Costanzo, and it's
Thank you,
7:27. This might be our last question. Just
I'll
as a
try
heads
and
up.
make it, thank you, Jamie. I'll try and make it concise. So we agree that the original scope of trees only included 65 because you were asked to give a count. So are you only removing those 65 trees, or are you now clear cutting? The second part of that question is, how many trees are going to be left behind? Is it clear cutting, or is it any tree over 6 inches? Is there an inch threshold? So basically, what size trees are you removing? What size trees are staying? Are the trees with the white dots that we fought over and got the 5 trees that we fought back and we got them saved, are they staying or going because now they're marked? So if, I know I got muted again, if we could answer all of those questions specifically and not reread the answers, I think we would all appreciate clarification.
Sure. So I'm going to split that between the trees in the public roadway or overhanging it that are in the jurisdiction of the tree warden, and I'm staying corrected by my team. It's ultimately 68 trees that have been posted along Middlebrook and Raymond, not 65. So just you know, I misspoke. So those are the trees that were posted by the tree warden. Again, we asked for all incompatibles, regardless of their size, that they are now, that are in the public roadway or overhanging it, that are under the jurisdiction of the tree warden. We ask that they be removed. So there is no size threshold or limit. It's based on the species of vegetation and their mature height. If they exceed that 15 feet at maturity, we sought to and asked for them to be removed in the town right of way. Similarly, within the easement, within the right of way on DOT property or on private property where we have easements, that same threshold for our specification for removing based on species and its ultimate mature height, whether it's greater than 15 feet or not, because of the lines that are involved there, the location of the lines within the right of way, and the width of the right of way. As I mentioned, it is a narrow right of way, and so we have that specification of seeking to remove everything greater than 15 feet at mature height across the entire right of way. So I hope that answered your question.
Sean, except for the part she is asking what will remain, what is being allowed to remain?
So what is being allowed to remain are vegetation species, types of shrubs and small trees and flowers and ferns that do not exceed a mature height of 15 feet. So that will remain. There may be some of that has to be removed because of its proximity to the trees, the tall growing trees, incompatible trees that we are removing. But that will be more of an, it's not that they are targeted, it's just that for practicality of removing the incompatible trees, some of them may be removed.
Thank you very much. And we have reached our 7:30 time. I believe I've taken down copious notes. I'm sure Eversource has too, with the comments from people this evening. I want to thank Eversource very much, and the public. You've asked great questions. This program this evening has been recorded. It was also run live over TV 79, so you can review it again on demand with TV 79. So to our friends at TV 79, I want to thank you so much for being here tonight and for recording the program. So with that, I will just say thank you and good night to everybody. If you are in transit, please be careful. I'm watching the storm and hearing the storm outside my window, and it's not great. So, and to all of our Eversource friends, please be safe if you have to be out there responding tonight. Thank you, everyone. Good evening.